So if we talk about the next topic, that is basically the cell membrane. The cell membrane, or you can say that as a plasma membrane. Okay, so the plasma membrane is basically a membrane. This is if we talk about the plants, it's mostly in the plants as well as in the animals too. As you guys all know, the cell was absent in the animal cell. So in animal cell we are having the cell membrane. So if we talk about the plants, so plants is basically having the membrane. So they are having the first, they are having the cell membrane, then they are having the cell wall. But if we talk about the animal cell, so we are having the cell, and the outer covering we are having the, that is cell membrane in the animal cell. So here we are having the plant cell with plant cells. Okay, so plasma membrane is basically the boundary of the protoplasm. What is protoplasm? Protoplasm is basically a living matter. It's basically a fluid, living matter, and this is basically the composition of the nucleus plus cytoplasm in the cell. Nucleus plus cytoplasm in the cell. We are calling that as a protoplasm. So protoplasm, this is a protoplasm, and this is the outer boundary. We are calling that as the cell membrane. Okay, this is basically found in all the prokaryotes and eukaryotes too. What is prokaryotes? As you guys all know, that is having the no nucleus, true nucleus, but eukaryotes like animal cell, plant cell, so they are basically this is the example of the bacteria, cyanobacteria, eukaryotes. As you guys all know, the plant cell, animal cell, this is present in both. So plasma membrane is also called the cell membrane. Okay, or we can say that cell membrane as a plasma lemma. This is another name of the cell membrane. Okay, so it's basically control the material that is moving in and out of the cell. So this basically this is a membrane that control this material passage. Okay, so if we talk about that, the cell membrane basically cover the part of cytoplasm, as you guys all know. So if we talk about the composition of the cell membrane, that how cell membrane is made up of, like from which things. So cell membrane is basically made up of the lipids and protein. Okay, so protein we are having, that is 60 to 80%, and if we talk about lipids, so that is 20 to 40%. Okay, and there is a small amount of carbohydrate too. Okay, so if we talk about the lipids, so lipid, as you guys all know, we are having the two ends. One is the hydrophobic and second is the hydrophilic. Okay, so as you guys know, lipid is basically the part of the plasma membrane. Basically that is having the two bilayer. Okay, two bilayer, which is made up of the two bilayer lipid membrane. Okay, which is basically the phospholipid. So that is basically arranged in the phobic and the hydrophobic and the hydrophilic ends. So that I'll be telling you in the structure. Okay, so if we talk about the structure of the plasma membrane, if you're talking about this, okay, yeah, one more thing I want to tell you guys is that it is present in the prokaryotes and eukaryotes, but this is basically absent in the bacteria. Okay, in some of the cell membrane, as you guys all know, the composition I have told you guys. Okay, 5 to 10% there is carbohydrates, 5 to 10% we are having the glycolipid and glycoprotein, that I'll be telling you too in the structure. If we talk about the structure so if we talk about the structure, so there was two scientists that was called Danley and Densel in 1930. Okay, according to them, the cell membrane was basically composed of the bilipid layer of lipids, and this lipid bilipid layer is basically surrounded with the monoprotein, and the structure of these both they called as a sandwich like structure. How? Let's see. This is basically the layer, bilipid layer, and with that we are having the protein here, so they called as a sandwich. But in 1972 there were two scientists, so that was Singer and Nicholson. They, according to them, the cell membrane was basically composed of the bilayer of the lipid in the form of the fluid. And they said that the fluid that is we are having, the fluid that is look like basically the arrangement of the protein are basically like ice bags in the sea. For example, this is the fluid of the lipid, and we are having the ice like structure proteins, and they are basically, you can say that they are floating. So they said that. So if we talk about the, according to the Singer and Nicholson, so they said that this model is basically made up of the bilipid layer, this one, and the protein molecules are basically embedded in this fluid. Okay, the membrane, if we talk about, so that is basically the 7 nanometer thick. Okay, let me make the structure of the cell membrane. And we are having like, these are the ends, let I'll be telling you. Okay, yeah, these are circle. Okay. So this is basically what, this is the lipid layer. This is the lipid layer. As you guys all know, the lipid is having the two ends. One is the hydrophilic, and second one is the hydrophobic. Okay, hydrophilic and the hydrophobic. Hydrophobic is basically the non-polar. This is basically the non-polar. Okay, and if we talk about the hydrophilic, so this is the polar, or this is the water loving. Okay, so hydrophobic is basically associated the face to face like this. These both are face to face, so they are the hydro, this is the hydrophobic end. And if we talk about this, so these are the hydrophilic, they are not face to face. Okay, but these both are face to face. So this is the bilipid layer structure, which we are having the two ends in the phospholipid, the hydrophilic and the hydrophobic. Okay, so they have said that basically the cholesterol is also here, like this one. We are having the cholesterol molecules too. These are the cholesterol molecules. Okay, and these cholesterol molecules are basically at the sum of the phospholipid layer, bilipid layer. They are at the sum of the intervals, not at all, but some of them. Okay, and we are having the protein molecule like this. Protein molecule. Yeah, the protein molecule. Some of the protein molecules are embedded in the cell membrane, and some of them are the outside, which means the embedment of this protein is basically the extrinsic intrinsic protein, which is basically the inside the cell membrane, and this is the outside of the cell membrane, which is called the extrinsic protein. We are having the two type of a protein here. Okay, the two type of the protein here. If we talk about the intrinsic protein, that is inside the cell membrane. Okay, so these basically work as a channel protein, which means that these basically work in the channel protein, specific molecule basically enter inside the cell membrane, so they basically work as a facilitated diffusion. Like specific molecule are basically attached to this channel protein and they come inside the cell membrane. Okay, if we talk about the extrinsic protein, that is a basically protein that is outside of the cell membrane and we are calling that as a carrier protein. Carrier protein, and this was the channel protein and this was the carrier protein. Okay, so now if we talk about, we are having the lipid, we are having the two type of lipid ends, phospholipid, in bilipid of the layer of the phospholipid we were having the two ends, hydrophobic and the hydrophilic and the hydrophobic, and two type of protein. Okay, as well as we are having the filaments of the cytoskeleton here, like this is basically the, this is the skeleton type in the cell membrane. Okay, so we are calling that a cytoskeleton, that basically provide the shape and you can say the mechanical support, and you can say that these are the filaments like structure. Okay, if the protein are basically if the carbohydrate, we are having this like structure in the upward of the cell. If the carbohydrate is with the, you can say that if the carbohydrate are attached to the protein, okay, so that we are calling that as a glycoprotein. If the carbon molecules are basically attached with the, you can say that the lipid layer, so that we are calling that a glycolipid. Okay, and here we are having the cytoplasm, as you guys all know, cytoplasm. And this is what, this is the, these holes are the phospholipid layer, this is the phospholipid layer, which is bilayer. Okay, so if we talk about the function of the plasma membrane, which are lipid, so that basically control the, you can say that the material which is watery material, concentrated material. Okay, and that fluid basically make the flexibility too. Okay, if we talk about the protein, so that protein basically has having a variety of a protein that is basically found in the plasma membrane, as you guys all know. So if we talk about the function, this was the structure, this was the structure of the cell membrane and this was the introduction. Now let's talk about the function. What is the function of this, you can say that cell membrane? So if we talk about this function, so that basically work as a transport of the material across the membrane. We are having two type of a transport, one is passive transport and second is the active transport. Passive transport, which means that they do not get energy, do not want energy, no energy is here. And if we talk about the active transport, this is the transportation of the material but with the energy, the ATP is required in this. Okay, if there is the WBC, that basically digests the bacteria, we are calling that as a phagocytosis. Okay, if we talk about the active transport, we are having two type of active transport. First is the exocytosis and second is the endocytosis. Exocytosis means the material which is coming out from the cell membrane, material coming out of the cell membrane. And endocytosis, that the material that is coming inside the cell membrane, coming inside. Further, endocytosis, we are having two types. One is the pinocytosis and second is the phagocytosis. Pinocytosis is basically what? Pinocytosis is basically drinking process, which means that the liquid move inside the cell membrane. That we are calling as a drinking process of the cell. If we talk about phagocytosis, which means solid particle digest in the cell membrane, okay, this is also called the eating process. process, and that was calling as a drinking process. As well as the cell membrane also work as a antigen is what, there is a foreign particle, okay, so that disturb the immune system. And cell membrane also work as an enzyme, which means that for the you can say the metabolic reactions too. As well as the cell membrane also work as a receptor, which is sensory cells. So this was about the structure and function and the introduction of the cell membrane plus composition. In the next video we will discuss about the cytoplasm and final further organelles.